All right. I think people, the live streaming is working. Perfect. All right. So welcome everybody to the second edition of the International Online Lecture 2020 at Leibniz University in Hanover. The event is hosted by the Faculty of Architecture and Landscape Science and moderated by the Institute of Design and Architectural Representation. My name is Tobias Nolte, and I'm joined by Mirko Becker, Professor for Digital Methods in Architecture. So for the second edition, it is my absolute pleasure, and I couldn't be more excited, to welcome Cristina Diaz-Moreno and Evren Garcia-Grinda to Leibniz University in Hanover. Cristina and Evren are principals and founders of the international recognized architecture practice amid.cero9, calling but not exclusively based in Madrid, Spain. Founded in 1997, amid.cero9 is a research-based design practice focused on contemporary, urban, technological, and cultural challenges, and is intensely committed to the development of very methodological disciplinary processes. And I have no doubt we will get an insight into their rigorous design approach tonight. In July 2019, and I assume it is July 2019, with a vast academic experience, Cristina and Evren have been appointed professors and directors of Studio One of the Institute of Architecture at the University of Applied Arts in Vienna, also known as Die Angewandte. They are succeeding in this position Zaha Hadid, who held the professorship from 2000 to 2015, and Katsuya Zishima from 2015 to 2019. Beside their professorship at Angewandte in Wien, they are ongoing visiting lecturers at the School of Architecture at Princeton University since 2017. At the total risk of my introduction exceeding a time limit, I'm only going to name a few of previous academic appointments of Cristina and Evren had in the past. Now I need to take a deep breath. They have been design critics in architecture and co-directors of an options studio at the Harvard University Graduate School of Design from 2015 to 2017. Diploma Unit Masters at the Architecture Association in London from 2009 to 2018. Visiting professors at the Institut für Kunst und Architektur at the Akademie der Bildenden Künste in Vienna. And visiting professors and unit co-directors at Städelschule Architecture class in Frankfurt from 2016 to 2017, where I actually met you for the first time. While teaching together in Madrid from 1998 to 2013, they have been lecturers throughout Europe, Asia, and the US. Christina's and Evren's work is part of the permanent collection of the Centre Pompidou in Paris and has been exhibited at the Architecture Biennale in Venice, official selection 2010, 2004, and 2000, and the Spanish Pavilion in 2014 and 2002, and the Greek Pavilion in 2014, among others. Their projects and writings of the first 15 years were documented in 2014 in a publication entitled Third Nature, a Micropedia, and an exhibition at the AA London. Recently, a monographic issue on their work has been published in El Croquis, number 184. And their work on public space has been presented at a solo show entitled Vaults, Beds, and Gardens at the School of Architecture at Princeton University in 2019. They've recently built the legendary ILE headquarters, and I'm abbreviating this because I'm unable to pronounce it in Spanish, in the headquarters in Madrid, for which they received several major prizes. Norman Foster, Sir Norman Foster, stated publicly about this project, and I quote, "I think it's a wonderful breath of fresh air. It is inspirational. Please help me welcome Cristina Diaz-Moreno and Evren Garcia-Grinda from amid.cero9. Welcome to Leibniz University."
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for a nice introduction. Very generous. And it's true that we met then, but we met again in Vienna.
Yes, but that was the first time. So please, if you want to share your screen and take it away, I'm excited to have you.
Yeah, one second.
1 second. We are sharing now the screen and opening the PowerPoint. Not working. 1 sec. It's taking a bit of time. Yeah.
Just 1 second, we're having certain difficulties now.
Oh, maybe I can take a brief moment to also explain again. I actually wanted to do this, but I forgot while you are solving the technical issues. To everybody who is joining on YouTube live stream, please, if you have any questions for Christina and Evren, please type them into the YouTube comment section. And both Mirko and I, we will be watching the live, the comments and bring them into the conversation. So anytime you have a question, we will collect the questions and post them on the Zoom section of the event. So if you don't have a Google account yet, and you can't do any YouTube questions, you also have the opportunity to do this while we are speaking. Otherwise, for those who want to pose questions on Discord, for example, also feel free to do that. But we will watch the comment section of the YouTube stream closely. So I think the technical issues are solved, and Christina and Everett, take it away.
Okay, yes, we are set. You never know when it's going to be like working or not working. Okay, thank you very much for coming today. Thank you to the audience, whoever and wherever they are. Thank you for being there. I'm sure that there are like at least some friends listening. Thank you, Tobias, for insisting. You know that it was very, well, nobody knows, but it was very difficult to be here today and to be presenting today. And Tobias have had an amazing patience with us. Thank you very much for insisting. And thank you, Mirko, for being also in charge of this. I'm going to start just saying that normally these titles that we have, like eyes, rooms, gardens, are always talking about experience, space, and nature, because third nature for us is a very important concept. You will see during the conference, during the lecture. And we are going to talk, that's something that we normally talk about, to the time in architecture, how time can be super elongated, and like during years, nothing happens, and at a certain point, everything comes together and happens, and how projects happen in parallel. Yeah, so this lecture is always like related with our way of thinking and working. We understand that design is a pure form of knowledge, and we are on the one hand obsessed with being conscious, or the consciousness of the world around, and connecting the parts that are like the main things that help us to make decisions, design decisions, in relationship with formal or geometrical, technological, practical, and even, well, any kind of decision is based with the complexity with the world around and putting things together. We understand this as a way of working in our office and as a way of working with our own students in the schools. And we understand this also as an alternative to the banality that dominates the discourse and the practice of architecture nowadays and during the last years. We always visit natural pieces, so we are going to be visiting gardens in this lecture, and we will see also, we normally see animals, birds, people, cosmologies. We talk about structural behavior or vision, and about discoveries also. And about amid, that is our name. Amid means in between, or surrounded by, or connected with things. So the name is very related with our own way of thinking. And as I said, time in architectural design normally can be super distorted. And in this project that you are watching in the screen, that was a long period of our life, running in parallel with many other little short projects. And in 2004, we won this competition, and during more than 10 years, we were developing and constructing the building, and at the same time, publishing things and having a lot of other projects very well connected with this one. So today we are going to be visiting especially Kinetorius Foundation, the one in the screen, but we are going to be talking about other connections, other relationships that happened during this period of time. Just to repeat somehow that our way of working is based on looking at the world around and understanding it, and being very conscious of the reality. And this project is absolutely an example of this understanding. So it's not an object, and we normally propose like this set of links more than an object, or a building that is understood as an isolated entity that just is placed on top of one plot and then just lives forever. It's not like that. It's totally a different understanding of what architecture could be or space could be. Is based on this a very complex set of connections. And we will be like developing and elaborating on this during the lecture. As I said, we will be talking about Kinetorius Foundation as a small cosmology. We like to understand that this is a small cosmology and not a building, and how it has been evolving and developing, and it's still like growing and changing constantly, because the garden is an alive part of it, and maybe the most important one. Just a short description about the Institución Libre de Enseñanza, that is the basis of this foundation. It was set up in 1876, and it was an experimental, in that moment, it was an experimental laboratory for new teaching methods. And it was driven by very important university professors, and among them, Giner de los Ríos, that is the one in the center of the picture. And they were sanctioned by the university, by the Central University, and they were suspended for pleading for academic freedom. They wanted to bring freedom for the students, and they were like totally suspended. And then they started this new education institution, convinced of the necessity of teaching the children in the best way of having a healthy society is to teach the children from the very beginning. And they created not only the institution itself, the Institución Libre de Enseñanza, but also they fostered the most important cultural and scientific centers in the country, in which people like Federico García Lorca, Salvador Dalí, Juan Ramón Jiménez, Luis Buñuel, Antonio Machado, and several Spanish Nobel Prizes, they were involved in all these institutions. All of them, they were linked, and they were very connected. And that was the most brilliant generation of our culture, of the Spanish culture, and in the till the moment that the Civil War started. In that moment, everything was like totally cut and stopped. And during and after the Civil War, the Institución Libre de Enseñanza, so the existing institution, was taken by the dictator, by Franco, and he destroyed he mainly burned the books as a message, like burning the cultural remainings. And only till he passed away, and even some years after, the institution was recovered. So almost 1 century in between, it was totally like disappeared. And at a certain point, the competition was launched. in this moment, the question was how you can address and answer to the reconstruction of an institution that was meaningful 100 years ago, not being nostalgic, not repeating things, not being an historical or having an historical language, but really translating the ideas of Ginar de los Ríos to the contemporary moment. And what could be the architectural answer? And well, in here you can see the location of the location in Madrid of the building, and you can see here the site plan. And although it's as you can see, the drawing is located, it is placed in a very urban fabric, but it's so internalized that also as you will see during the lecture, the inner space is having a different character. So towards the outside is very urban and totally different in the inside.
Well, as you can see, you can imagine, an institution was similar to the Spanish culture that at a certain moment were like interrupted. And the descendants were forced to go to exile, basically, and then everything was destroyed mostly. Only few remaining things stayed on the place. So for us, the working material, and we of course knew about the institution, but we were not connected personally to it. So in a way, the working material was so sensible and difficult to handle and define and even to evaluate for us as architects as a common identity. So how can you work with that? How can you respond to something that you're not part of, but is having a clear cultural and almost group identity? So basically, the question was like really for us in the competition was like a big one, how to deal with this alive page of the history of Spain in a meaningful way, without, as Cristina was saying, without having a nostalgic approach. So this was the question, and that's something that was transforming. This competition was transforming the way we were approaching projects, basically, because then at a certain point we realized that the total subjectivity or the arbitrariness on architecture is not meant to be fulfilling the expectations in these kind of cases, right? So, but let us start also by saying that the notion of space is a crucial aspect for us. We know that it's often overused and word by architects, but let us define it a bit better or a bit more personally. For us, space can be defined as a complex interwoven network of interrelationships with other things. So we're talking about architectural space, obviously, right? But if we think about architectural space as a complex place where an immense amount of interactions between different agents are overlapped, both in real time, so that we are using the space and interacting with others, and we're interacting with architecture as well, and we are forming, the space around us. But it's not only that thing, but also connected with other things and with other localities, with other individuals, with other situations. Then you can have an idea of how we approach this notion of space. Obviously, first of all, is opposed to a purely passive concept of reception. This kind of idea that the space is there to be perceived in a completely passive attitude. It's more a space of intermediation. It's obviously the experience of ourselves being part of a situation under permanent construction, and with other biotic and non-biotic entities. So, and we were so amazed by the responsibility of somehow proposing something for this thing, that at a certain point we understood that Ginar de los Ríos, with Ginar de los Ríos and the context, could be associated with a group of people or a subculture with a common identity, a specific group of individuals that are having this kind of well-defined cultural, I would say, a identitarian nature, with the material world, with the objects, the interrelation with technology, the visual culture. constantly, or we usually talk about context in a very kind of narrow way in architecture, referring mostly to the physical context, the city where the artifacts is going to be installed, or certain kind of also cultural, but really, really in a very, I would say, shallow way. So I think, or in that moment, we realized that the space could be a phenomenon of interaction, and having that in mind would be fundamental to define who are the actors in this mutual set of interrelations that we define as a space. So basically, taking into account that architecture was having serious difficulties to identify, to categorize, and therefore to integrate us humans via the usual and abstract generic characterizations. So basically, taking into account, the individuals that will be direct or indirectly related with this mutual set of interrelations that we are like defining as a space.
As a friend explained, when we discovered that the context could be understood as an expanded notion of relations of the parts of the project, we were doing projects like this one that you have in the screen, also in the office. So we were experimenting with our students in the schools, but also experimenting ourselves in the office. And this one is the Gay Vatican, and we were trying to relate a specific intentional community with architectural decisions. And the behaviors, the material worlds of that specific group of people, the symbolic expressions of these micro communities. Normally, in this case, it's a bigger community, but normally we were working with micro communities, so with very specific characteristics. And without resulting in a direct or banal linguistic appropriation or translation. Because we believe that contemporary and alternative ways of living are extremely interesting. For us, is still relevant after 10 years. And the lifestyles could be one of the most intense and genuine product of our own culture, even though the tiny micro groups. They constitute at the same time a record and a critique of the society, a deforming mirror, and a real attempt to build an alternative to the codes, customs, and dominant material worlds. Based on affiliation and affection, they are in fact mini societies proposing direct confrontation with the mainstream society, while at the same time cultivating dissensus, many times through alternative aesthetics that represent a symbolic way of expression and negotiation of identity.
And coming back to General de los Rios, we had a very interesting problem there. That was basically how to connote in architecture without direct allusion, without, a playful, I would say, take on different languages and assemblage of languages, and how to recall these links that we were talking about without falling into a simplistic, almost populistic identification with the identity of a group, which is usually one of the problems of these kind of approaches. Surprisingly, and that's something that was a discovery, we found a possible answer in General de los Rios himself, in his understanding of the landscape. That was a very modern and almost a proto-ecological one. He basically considered landscape as a cultural construct, meaning that landscape and culture have a reciprocal and bionivocal influence. It was a very interesting approach for his time, very advanced, in a kind of a secluded and isolated country and in the south part of Europe, kind of poor also culturally. And he was like really addressing this interrelation between landscape and people, right? Obviously having in mind the kind of almost geographical understanding of von Humboldt. He was obsessed with this kind of images, with the rough beauty of the Castilian plateau, the Castilian landscape, that through his eyes was mainly poor lands, sad golden lands of barren nature, but also having a really intense beauty. This is a picture photographed by us several years ago, almost in the same moment that we were developing the concepts. But it was like super interesting to start discovering things about this group of individuals, this institution, and discovering that for him the really important thing was the direct contact with things for educating individuals, for educating children, and specifically to landscape and nature. It was a series of discoveries that brought us to a total inversion or totally putting upside down somehow the targets of the project. So instead of a building, that was the main thing that the brief was asking for. We just thought, hey, in here the really important part could be the reconstruction of an existing but totally destroyed garden that was the center of the communal life, of the public life of the institution. That basically was a school for children. So the brief asked for a completely rethinking of the institution itself, not being anymore an educational one, but transforming into a cultural one. And we just thought, okay, let's do something that gives shape to the garden that will be the building, instead of thinking of the building as the main figure to be projected. So we were involved kind of in a very suicidal mode into defining the garden instead of defining the building itself. And we selected different densities, locations, and growth to foster the anarchic distribution of resources among the plants and trees. So we were like really working really hard defining this artificial piece of nature from the different floors of the different canopies, and the different sequence of how we plant things and how we can reproduce certain ecosystems. So everything was meant to be produce wildness and somehow the naturalness of the wild based on the competition of resources. But everything needed to be hidden. So it was not a garden to be somehow seen, but simply to be perceiving the ecosystemic nature of these different species being put together. We started with a dense in the lower part of the image, with a dense wild horizontal layer in the south part, in a kind of vertical garden at the top of the image, around the empty space that will be or that was to be occupied by the auditorium underground. So basically reproducing in a way recreating the Salernstern style beauty of the Castilian plateau in wintertime. We thought this garden needs to be deciduous and the mid-sized plants needed to be pruned in order to facilitate the vertical growth of the branches, to create a certain sense of not totally under maintenance garden, something that could be taken as a wild piece of nature. It's obviously a fragment of an artificially constructed ecology, sauvage, because it seems to be barely maintained, and it's not easily understandable because you cannot see the rhythms that were inscribed in there, and it's far away from any formal criteria. It is I think we're having here a problem, but let's try to see if the video works. No, it doesn't work. So let's pass to the next one. So there were like 13 videos for you to see, the actual state of the garden, because the photographs were like really, really done or made or taken when it was like almost planted. And now it's really a mass of vegetation, sheltering and hosting many other species as well. As the Castilian Plateau Forginer is not green except for few weeks in here, the spring weeks. But it's instead of that, it's purple, coral, and silver, right, as you see in the image. We used for the creation of the garden the only existing written record of the original garden that was existing on this plot, and we selected the species contained in the new one, basing the selection on the species that Giner himself was writing when he was out with the students for excursions, throughout the landscape to teach them how to approach the landscape as a cultural construct. So you see in here the grid of pits of the gardens during the process of plantation. The sequence of a wild, naked garden, and kind of a strangely non-maintained during the winter, slowly flowering in the spring and reaching a frugal, excessive, and compacted and mass of greenery, is transformed, and during the seasons, and recalls the different natural ecologies that Giner de los Rios was so keen on visiting and understanding as part of the education of children, and then the basis for the renewal of the country. Well, you see, it seems clear that apart from us, we can understand a space as well as something shared with other species. Because in here it's obvious, that the presence of humans, even in the photographs, is not that important. It's the recreation of that kind of cultural approach to landscape and nature, but it's mainly, somehow induced by the presence of other species. So I think it's really, this is well, it was a video, but it's not working as well, but never mind. At that point, we ask ourselves, then, if that kind of a space is shared with other species, what could be the other actors that are invited, so to speak, to this kind of new notion of, not new notion, but a kind of renewed notion of a space, and as in a space of intermediation.
And almost since the very beginning of our practice, we understood that architecture is not just death, materials, and bricks, but it's also not architecture, but our understanding of architecture is also based on understanding that other species can be part of the whole project. And in this moment, we started in 2002, but even before, we just thought about working with animals as part of the proposal of the design. And that was a competition that we did for Ames, for the thermal power station in Ames in Iowa, where we, at that point, I always say that because at that point it was like naive understanding to propose the transformation of an existing building into a piece of nature. But in that moment, already knowing that this understanding of humans, not humans, architecture, materials, animals, and any kind of possible ingredient can be really architecture and not just dead buildings. And the video is not going to work anyway. Yeah. The same notion of this architectural understanding was applied in this coming project, that it was also artificially generated and converted into a living system that was what our proposal for the National Museum of Energy in Spain. The difficulty was, well, they asked for a museum of energy and they don't have a real collection. There's no collection to show. So we try to understand what could be done in terms of answering to a museum of energy through architectural decisions. And we proposed the management of energy to give shape to the spaces, to the geometry, to the geometrical decisions, and the introduction of a complete ecosystem as part of the mechanism to maximize the efficiency, the energy efficiency. So it's a complete ecosystem inside, like a living and plants, animals, water, and also participates actively in the treatment of the indoor climate and energy control. In this way, the inner space was understood and converted into a climatic lobby, but also a new typology of greenhouse. It's something in between.
Yeah, it was very interesting because actually the brief was asking for a kind of a reproduction of a forest of the Carboniferous period. That was the origin of all the fuel and all the the oil and so on. And we thought, let's convert this into the lobby of the building and let's start, with the very origin of the production of energy in making it participate into the treatment of the air of the building, basically. And maybe is Tobias was mentioning at the very beginning, this publication of 2014 that was called titled Third Natures. Maybe now it's more obvious for you, after listening to us for a while, why we were so interested in this term at that time, Third Natures, originally coined by Jacopo Bonfadio during the 16th century. Jacopo Bonfadio was basically a priest that was trying to describe a completely new materiality happening in that time, and completely different space that was appearing. Basically, first nature is the nature itself that is happening by itself. Second nature was used since Cicero to describe the human manipulation of nature for practical purposes, such as agriculture. And, Jacopo Bonfadillo made this invention of this term related with the new Renaissance gardens that were starting to appear in that moment. They were having not only a new and totally unexpected material condition, something in between natural and man-made, but more importantly for him, were culturally produced and received. They needed to be culturally produced and received. So there were different layers of reading inscribed within gardens. You could be just pleasantly experience them as a kind of environment with living species, but there was a kind of a cultural reading of mythology and classical culture being inscribed in the gardens themselves. And this also was a kind of discovery that happened partially because of this wonderful book, Polyphilo's Dream, by Francesco Colonna. But that was basically for us kind of important because it was contesting the material, geometrical, and functional understanding of architecture. So gardens in themselves are constantly muting, so you can they're constantly evolving, so you cannot refer them as finished entities. They're discussing the use of geometry as well in architecture. They're discussing also the functionality of the spaces, going really beyond, the functional state of the considerations of our spaces. So this is somehow kind of discovery of gardens and the understanding of this space of interrelation that is also having a kind of culturally inscribed layer of reading within them, liberated us at a certain point also from the narrow-minded understanding of the relationship of human actions or functions with the spaces, And in our case, there is not a close relationship, and we're trying to dismantle constantly this kind of bionivocal relation between function and space, and looking always for somehow spatial configurations that are having a strong character, and they're also allowing the widest range of affordances possible. So meaning that they are making possible a lot of different activities happening in there as spaces capable to generate and induce this kind of set of interrelationship between different agents.
And of course, for us, the understanding of the spatial conditions of the spatial organization is always a must. We can talk about animals, other species, we can talk about the social groups, but the spatial organization is something super necessary. And in this case, related with the previous one, the understanding of a spatial organization is based on the one hand, the recreation of the historic headquarters, because they had the configuration of little pavilions around a garden, and following the actual regulations, of course, that was like forcing us to follow the existing massing with respect to the rights of the surrounding buildings. And this one, this picture that you are going to see in the screen is the Macpherson Pavilion. That was the typology in the existing headquarters. And the proposal is based then on a series of pavilions and classrooms, basically, and elevated pieces like the Macpherson. And as some definitions by Kinetorius that are very beautiful, one is surrounded by a belt of greenery, so the greenery should be there, and pursuing the ideal of the institution of approaching to the closest extent possible to outdoor life. So pedagogy related with being outside and enjoying in nature. The final proposal was therefore this series of pieces to be perceived as independent, but in fact, of course, connected as in only one entity. It's kind of frozen, I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's moving now. Let's go back to the plan. No?
So all of them have this kind of angle and inclined sides in a way that you perceive them smaller when you are inside. And yeah, once you walk Inside, the building is totally fragmented into pieces in a way that there is always a little scale inside. As I said, outside there is this urban scale, but inside the garden is the main part. Therefore, it is a garden, not a building, as a friend explained. But internally, these rooms, these classrooms, are thought to have a geometry that is not that is almost circular, not having a specific orientation, because also the way of understanding pedagogy for him was very horizontal. There's no tutor and people listening, but everyone learning at the same time. So there are few different sizes and groupings that permit different configurations of the space. And these spaces, as I said, they don't have a prevalent direction, but also the relationship with the garden is very important, because the garden is ever changing all the year long, along the day, along the months, among the seasons, and the relationship with the classrooms, not classroom, rooms, is very important also. And is working with the different layers that surround the video is not working again. Is working with different layers, from the lattice to the glass to the different curtains that are in the interior. The system of rooms is also surrounded by this thick specialized dividing wall, the black part of the drawings, where you can find this hollow perimeter wall that shelters different spaces, like the staircases, the elevators, ancillary spaces, to provide all the necessary programs to the rooms, and are like widen or narrow, working with an excessively big corridor that is not a corridor in itself, but the space where the students can work before and after the classrooms, to have kind of informal meetings. And we always understand that this space before the classrooms is even more important than the classroom, than the rooms and themselves.
A similar notion related with the spatial organization was explored in the multifocal auditorium underground, that is occupying and in the plans the top part of the images. It reproduces the set of rooms of the ground floor, but inverting the way they're related with the garden. So instead of like looking into the garden with this lattice that is filtering the views, they're obviously open to the main stage. So the rooms that are in the upper part are rooms for many other purposes, and they're looking to the garden in here. They are inverted and looking into the main stage through these large cyclopean eyes that are also having a very important structural reasons, because they are meant to be holding, the steel columns on top of them, right? So they're like diverting. I think, well, I'm sorry that the video is not working, but so basically the shape of these elements, they're like looking like a strabismic openings that look one another, also act as bearing beams, as I was saying, and exploring the same kind of consequences of using the same kind of spatial arrangement, but like inverting and changing the relations between the different spaces and the way the rooms are interconnected.
In the coming project, this one, we also explored typological inventions based on clear spatial organization serving as a space of interaction. This one is placed in the Jerte Valley, and it was thought to be the place for the celebration of the cherry blossom in a landscape where the cherry tree monoculture has become a touristic attraction in springtime. The building is an assertive appearance that uses the size, the scale, to establish a point of reference in the valley. We, in this project, the strategy is the opposite to Kinetorius Foundation. It is like working internally. And instead of having a garden as the center of the space, we enclose the space completely, isolating it from the landscape and selecting carefully the connections with it. The aim was to intensify the perception of the landscape by constructing a completely interiorized dome, where the space can be really like choreographed and perceived as a church. We always talk about it as a temple. But at the same time, the interior space is defined by these big halls connected with the exterior in a selected way. There are entrances, views, and sunlight connections. What we proposed for the cherry tree was And the understanding of, in this case, it looks like an object, but it's not. Again, the understanding of something with the presence, position, volume, and material, you can really establish a relationship with a landscape, like a church for pilgrims and a chapel that floats in the landscape. So the entire building is understood as the final destination of this pilgrimage, where with 3 different ways of ritualistically entering to it, with the ramp that is connected through the annular foyer and entering to the ring, leading finally to the central space that is surrounded by a spatial ring occupying the upper level. You can see some pictures under construction. It was like under construction till the moment that the crisis arrived to Spain, and then at a certain point it was stopped, and it's still stopped, waiting for the soon recovery to come. So the concrete part is everything is finished till the concrete part, and we are waiting to start again, hopefully soon.
Well, there are like a lot of interesting things happening whenever you are like interacting a dome, you know, and the shell of dome with openings that are selectively connecting the interior space, this completely interiorized space, with the light and with certain views and the entrances. So basically, as you can imagine, you know, we needed to do something in the, if we wanted to open up those big, large holes, you know. So we decided to bend the surface and to gain stiffness, but also by doing so, really modulating the light entering and also producing these kind of thresholds in the entrances. So basically, also we introduced, you know, in the even regular distribution of planes that were composing the dome, we introduced distortions within the paneling, within, you know, the tessellation of it, you know, and these distortions were creating this kind of unstable image, you know, both recovering the structural behavior, but also patterning, you know, the entire shell and the entire cladding, you know, that was also basically replicating the interior structure onto the outside surface. In the inside, it is a super cheap, really cheap structure. The only complication was to really be capable to construct the geometry carefully, but it's just simple, very thin plates joined to a tube, a 50 millimeters tube, steel tube, you know. They're like having, the complication was about doing the knots and making the plates and these kind of slender figures to participate in the structural behavior of the dome, basically, and bending them towards the interior, you know, in the construction of these large holes that we were speaking. And basically, coming back to General de los Ríos, no, I think, and leading to the end of the also the presentation, we were having another interest in there, right? Because at a certain point, you know, this creation of the garden and this necessity of making the building literally disappear was a big problem for us. You know, Cristina was talking about the fragmentation of these small pavilions that are joined on the back. But we thought, let's go for a lattice, you know, that could have a garden character, so to speak, you know, something that you could be associating with a fence of a garden, but also that acts as a filter between the classrooms and the garden, as a light veil. But it was also the result of a perceptual experiment, partially based on someone, and that is Santiago Ramón y Cajal, that is the father of the modern neurobiology, a Nobel Prize, and personally and scientifically very much related and quite close to the institution itself, the regional one. So we thought there was a great opportunity to play with something, which is the principles of binocular vision and how we perceive a space and depth of a space and distance. So Ramón y Cajal, with this mark, by the way, if you don't know him and his work, double check his drawings. They're like absolutely amazing, literally. He investigated in 1998, the optical chiasm of mammals, so the part of the brain with the optical nervous cross, that is producing this thing. You know, it's kind of long and complicated to explain, but basically we make a process within our brain taking information from the two eyes, mixing them together, and deleting information that we are giving for granted that is duplicated. So we form a mental image that is giving depth to our perception of the space by combining these two images. By doing so, if you're like taking an object and that is placed on a certain distance with a certain size, you can reproduce what is in the image, which is this game or this play that we were playing with when we were children. That is, if you close consecutively your eyes, you can make certain things disappear in front of yourself, right? So that, because certain information is partially deleted by our brain. This was the basis for the creation of the lattice. The lattice that is composed, that is this one. So by placing the lattice and giving them certain thicknesses to the bars, to the three layers of bars that is composing them, from the exterior looks like really solid, almost opaque and inaccessible, and from the interior becomes transparent. It disappears perceptibly. It's something that cannot be photographed, basically, but whenever you're like in there, you simply, in the interior of the classrooms, you simply see the thing being disappear. It's like the sensation of being, in your house, looking at the window looking to the rain throughout the window. It's almost this blurry presence that is blurring the presence of the garden, but it's not blocking it. So this also referring to the concentration within these rooms, that are almost interiorized spaces. So basically, the background, whenever you are in the interior, the background of the garden takes optical precedence of the elongated bars, and magically, as I said, the lattice disappears from the interior. So the lattice is at the same time a garden facade, this kind of lattice device of unveiling things selectively, and also obviously a facade towards the interior, to the classrooms. There was a kind of really big thing to do this thing, so a really big effort on defining the density of the different panels. There are like 1,000 different panels that were digitally and algorithmically somehow generated. And we will double testing the effects on real scale mockups to see what would the density on the different parts of the building, depending on the illumination, and also the way we wanted to be partially blocked the view from the exterior to the interior, so to speak, modulating the views. So there are not frames to them, they're not having any frame. So simply there are like 3 layers. The first 2 are somehow rotated and they're welded one another. And the exterior one is the one that is isolated. We give rigidity to the whole thing, within these 20 centimeters. So whenever you just screw them on top, they're like falling like a perfect suit, like clearly being on place, right? Like this one, it's a really thin, and but at the same time really sophisticated veil that is producing all these effects that we were talking about. In the corners, the bars are coming to the interior and well to the ones that are cut to make these to make these clean edges. So again, the videos are not working well, and the effect obviously of the transparency of the lattice is inverted during the night. Here you see how the absence of frames makes the lattice continuous. So you cannot distinguish the different pieces. Yeah. So
this notion based on vision and perceived tectonics was also the main strategy for this project, the Archaeological Visitor Center in Clunia Sulpicia. The first image was part of this project. There is a Roman city place in Peñalba de Castro, like a lost place in Burgos. And this is the entrance to the archaeological site, in fact. And we play with the possibility of literally give shape to things through our perception, through our eyes, and also maintaining an intense relationship with the surrounding landscape. The building is very simple. It's a thick horizontal slab elevated off the ground to cover a set of parallel rooms. and is an horizontal landscape constructed by these parallel beams that you can see in the physical model that permits a panoramic view in the interior as well as the surroundings. And the emptying of a large axis constructs the projection of the view to the landscape, like you can see in here, and crosses the rooms perpendicular from side to side as a visual cone by means of another transverse reinforced concrete that it was necessary to have this bolt in perpendicular to the other bolts that serves as the support for the shell beams. And it becomes an outdoor space also oriented towards the Celtiberian settlement origin of this city. On top of the slab, a landscape roof is simply an extension of the surrounding landscape. And the slab is defined by a set of, as I said, bolted reinforced concrete shell beams with variable widths. So the system is based on just having different widths for them that go down to the height of a window. It's kind of like going down.
Almost going down to the height of a door, no?
And the bolts, as you can see in the image, are punctuated by skylights that intersect in parallel to the flat sides of the shells, producing these very, well, we like them, very interesting geometries, but they are necessary because you need to introduce light in this otherwise dark, extensive space. So it was a way of introducing light from the upper part. But it is almost imperceptible. It's almost imperceptible from the access road. By reducing the height of the building to 3 meters only, it becomes an abstract line on the hillside of the city, so not taking over the existing site. This idea is based on here. This is a drawing that is moving, but we have the final drawing.
We have the final one. So basically, let me explain this with this other drawing here. Let me pass to the next one. Yeah, that one, right? But sorry. It is reacting slowly. So basically, what we encounter in there, in coming back to Kinetorius Foundation, this is the drawing. You know, this is basically the drawing that we did in the competition. We improved it later on, but it was the very basic first drawing that we did after setting up the garden. We said, okay, if we consider our eyes, instead of screens that collect information, like a kind of, things that are like, receiving information, if we could simply think about them as tools that can give shape to the space while we are entering into the space of the garden, we could be shaping the massing of the building itself, defining the depth, defining the distances, defining the heights, defining the inclination for this almost imperceptible building to be appearing within there without any other kind of help. So basically giving shape to the actual, presence of the building through vision. And this was the kind of theme that was for us really important, making coincide this kind of S shape that you can intuitively see on the screen, that is the path that the visitors that will come to the public events happening in the underground auditorium and in the exhibition space will take. So everybody that is entering into the building will be selectively looking and seeing parts of the building, but never ever perceiving the building as a whole. And that was what we tried to reproduce in there, so that the building is not seen, very basically as Kinetorius himself, that was constantly throughout his whole life rejecting to be photographed. So there were only several photographs of himself, happily enough, very much connected with photographic experiments on that epoch, right? Only that. So rejecting to be perceived as an individual and as an object, so somehow, as someone that is having a presence. From the outside, the building is never perceived frontally. So it's somehow you look at it angled. So you only see a fragment here and a fragment there. So the building is never the main object in the field of vision and not the protagonist to be perceived. Whenever you look at it, it tends to disappear magically. So that, in a way, was the way we started to understand, buildings as a repository of links with many other things. We just today described few of them, but also things that are through their presence, their materiality, but also the interaction with other species could become these small cosmologies, these small worlds, of interconnections. Many times in our case, interiorized or having a very precise and calibrated relationship with the surroundings. And in doing so, and these materialized microcosmoses that I would call, could provide, in a way, a small scale alternative to certain spatial and social ordering that we are having constantly around, In the same way, and that's what we wanted in a way, that the gardens and the pavilions of the original institutions were the role that they were having during 60 years until the arrival of the Spanish Civil War. And somehow understanding that throughout the construction of these, what we call cosmologies or cosmographies, there are self-contained microcosmoses, could reflect a particular understanding of the world that could also have affective relations with objects, subjects, and natures, but embodying them in buildings, either physically or virtually. Is basically what we tried in this case, and how we somehow started to think about, the space in between things, or the space understood as this interwoven set of relationships with other things, with other entities, that could somehow have a connotative value without a direct allusion, and very much related, with the experience of a space being constructed by ourselves, but also with an intellectual ambition and fiscal commitment, which is something that we always like to be finishing our presentations with. That's all for today. Thank you very much.
But then we can open questions and answers with all the audience. So Tobias and Mirko, you are the representatives of this audience.
I just unmute Mirko. No, he doesn't. So I don't know. We just I don't know. Do you watch? I keep watching American late night hosts, and they need to perform without audience, and then they always clap themselves. Honestly, I thank you so much. I think this was extremely inspiring and insightful. I regret already that we agreed for you to lecture only an hour, and and I think from what I can read also from the YouTube comment section, the YouTube channel is on fire. So really, thank you so much, and it was actually quite an international audience, or it continues to be a very international audience, and people write things like, "It is so poetic what you both do. It is a great contribution to architecture." There is an immense contribution both to your project and the way you also talk about it and present your work. I mean, I feel like it's just it's a pure pleasure to see and listen you talk about it. Mm-hmm. I think this is it's a real pleasure to have you. because I have tons of questions, but maybe I don't know, I don't want to put you on the spot, Mirko, but do you maybe want to pick one or two from the YouTube channel?
Yes. Also, before I start with the question, thank you very much for that kind of brief but very deep overview into some of your projects and your work in general. I really enjoyed it. So there's one question from Victor saying he's following your work for a while and would like to ask what role of color plays in your drawings. He really finds the drawings really gorgeous, and I might like to add what role color plays then in your work also. Kind of what's the relation between color in your drawings and in your work?
In the drawings is clear because we understand drawings as tools for thinking and for understanding what we are doing, and we use the drawings to think. So the palette must be super open, and of course colors is only one part. So I don't think that colors are a main ingredient, it's only one, because anything can be done with a drawing. It's much better to understand that for us, drawings are tools and colors is one part. And maybe centering in the same direction in our own life, no?
Yeah, color is kind of an interesting thing because that's a personal and individual, maybe totally subjective trajectory of us rejecting maybe some of the topics and the vocabulary of the Spanish architecture when we started. There was like this formal, elegant, revamp of modernism in a way, very well done in many cases, but in a way so far away from reality and the, I would say, reality of this amazing but poor country, both culturally and many times, culturally and materially, that we love, basically, that we wanted to reconnect things with the real world around, basically. So there was a kind of naive, very starting moment in where we wanted just to revive architecture in a way, many different ways. It's like reconnected with the things that we were having around, the expectations that the young democracy were having at that time, with life on the everyday life. That is the richest thing that we're having in Spain, basically. And that was the very first thing that we wanted to really reintroduce in architecture. Many different things that were like forbidden and forgotten. Both things. Both in our education and the practices of many of our colleagues that we respect a lot. I mean, it's not take it as a direct criticism. It was our take on things that we wanted to do. And there is a funny moment where things started to have color by themselves. It's like for example, we were like having for I think 3 years a really colorful facade for this building that we presented today. There was basically composed by ceramic tiles, ceramic tubes, glazed ceramic tubes with really polychromy patterns, that were like also giving a kind of depth to the garden. But we were blessed by the fact that it was too expensive. So we needed to find an alternative to it. There was this lattice that is actually very, very, very amazingly cheap, But basically the building is kind of also cheap in many ways. And then we discovered that by introducing reflection, we could have the green of the garden being reflected if we were able to incline a bit the pressure, and the color of the sky were like inclining. So there was like this reconciliation of colors being inserted in a different way. That maybe is the moment in where we are, right? And in other cases we just play with color to emphasize this kind of I would say clash and this differentiation between artifacts and nature and landscape around. That would be the cherry tree blossom chapel. That is directly and brutally imposing this presence, and I would say fighting and really being related with this amazing landscape that surrounds it. That is this kind of endless array of cherry trees blossoming in spring. That is a monoculture culture. So I would say the color is something that belongs to our own trajectory, but it's changing a little bit nowadays, the way we approach it.
Can I, Mirko? So, there's actually one of the questions I had, and I mentioned in a previous call to you guys that last week, for example, we had this like a conversation around the role of geometry within. And so like having a presentation both from an architect and a stonemason, right? And an expert on, actually holds a PhD in construction history, and with a very specialization on stereotomy. And when I'm just curious to hear, because you talk about these both on, you talk about like tessellation, you talk about in the Calavnia Archaeological Center, you talk about these like conic sections and vaulted sections. Would you be able to give a little hit? So do you consider geometry as sort of like a repertoire of architectural form that you apply to your projects, or what role does geometry play in your architecture?
Well, as we, go ahead.
On the one hand, we are very obsessed with geometry, if you wish, let me explain. We always try to find a way of finding the proper geometry depending on the design decision. And this is one of the main tasks, mainly when we are doing competitions or we are working in the office, and even one of the main requirements for our students. We are always trying to ask them to make decisions looking for the geometry that is really the best one when they are looking for something, whatever the idea. And this is always translated into decisions through the drawing. So coming back to the previous answer about drawings as tools. And of course, it's part of our way of working and understanding since the very beginning. I must say that this is coming from the school, when we were students.
I think geometry is, as other things, we talked also a bit about the spatial organization, it's something that observes us or our experience. But I think there is a moment where that is precisely the beginning of this project that we presented today, that we started to somehow realize that someone could, with a bit of effort, I must say that it's not an easy task and it's not an easy endeavor, to try to relate every single architectural decision, such as geometry, or such as massing, or such as perception, or such as all the many small things that you're doing on an everyday basis, with the contexts of the buildings. So this expanded notion of context, but also the physical context that you're using, the culture that is embedded in things. And we tried really since that moment, we really tried to, and I know there are like 1,000, and not, I would say, not totally meaningful decisions in our projects. I know that there is it's a almost impossible endeavor, but we always try to connect that decisions with things around. Funny enough that many people found many kind of metaphors and many kind of connections that were not even for us foreseeable, that we didn't expect this to happen, right? For example, in the Cherry Tree Palace, because we were so obsessed with how to generate that geometry that could have an structural kind of sense with the things coming down inside. And we thought a lot about, in that moment, inflatables, as a way of defining the possible geometry for that, but not exactly fine-tuning that idea with the catenary. So doing a lot of kind of internal experiments for us. And then suddenly people started to call it the rotten cherry. Looking actually very much, because the cherries are the cherry that are cultivating in the stem, that you can take out without causing any damage to the thin, produces a very particular shapes because of the inflation with the water of the and the growth of the cherry tree, of the cherry itself. Sorry, and it was a funny and I would say connection that we didn't expect to happen. But I guess geometry is an everyday crucial kind of battlefield for us. That we
because when there's like something that really drives me and like that drives me crazy in the most positive sense when I see your drawings, is because they're so rich, and they seem to be both in, like there seem to be so many ways to read your drawings as either instruction how to construct it, as if it was like stereotomic drawings, or atmospheric, or there's so many ways to read them, and they're so rich and layered that it's just a pure pleasure to look at them. And I feel like there's like all these considerations, it seems, to like layered into an artifact that explains the project on multiple different ways.
But it's funny. I think we, not always, but many times many people says to us, "Oh, your drawings are beautiful," but obviously there is on certain things on our side, but they're not ends in themselves. It's something that we really absolutely make use to clarify our minds, to really produce this level of precision. For example, something that obsesses us is what is the precision level in the materials and the construction that will be applied, on site, because it's something that obsesses a lot. What is the scale of things, and we try to capture that in the drawings from the very beginning. And in the 3D models and all the tools that we're using, including models and everything else, that are not, to be honest, shown at the end, right? There are many tools in our office that are related with this precision. They're obsessed with, and the drawings are simply something that is conveying, this kind of obsession, holding the tools for architecture. Yeah, I think we were many times paired with people that is obsessed with representation, and we were told many times that we are about representing things, but it's not at all our intention, not at all our not at all obsessed with. And we love drawings, yes, but
the very rewarding moment in our life as architects, very rewarding. The foundation, Kinetorius Foundation, has been a very difficult project to just finish. And everything happened, and many difficult moments were like throughout the process. Anyway, during this process, we needed to convince the clients so many times. It was a understandable process of convincing them that their money could end up having a good result. And at a certain moment, and this was the rewarding moment, they said to us, "But did you know that this building could have been ending like that?" Because they didn't understand the drawings at all. But for us, those drawings were absolutely the tools to understand the building. And that was a great moment, because through drawings, they didn't see.
Even through visualization, so they felt. But you know that it was to be like that. Yeah,
It was nice.
we tried very hard.
Fantastic. Mirko, do you want to bring in another question from YouTube?
Yeah, there's one more question from Isabel. She's saying, "I would like to ask how you translate context and culture into buildings. Is it similar to the literal translation in Freddy Mamani's, the Bolivian architect's work?"
Yeah, that's nice. I've been watching the chat.
Okay.
It's a short, tiny connection with Freddy Mamani, but of course we respect his work. And during these 10 years teaching at the, 9 years teaching at the AA, the main work with the students was like based on selecting social groups, specific social groups, and working with them during 1 year and making decisions based on the understanding of the social groups. Of course, the Cholets were there. Of course, Freddie Mamani
We were
was
many
there.
times part of.
Because they are so exuberant. Normally, the students, the tendency was like looking for exuberant and very, very rich social groups. And yes, but not only Freddie Mamani, of course.
I think I mean, the diversity, if you have a look to his work and ours and others that are preoccupied with similar subjects, speaks about the multiplicity of outputs that you could have. Generationally, we were facing the work of previous generations that we love and respect as something many times very arbitrary. You know, that they were like a really difficult tour de force, complicated endeavors, really challenging things that were not understandable in many ways, you know, where they were coming from and the audience that were directed to, the things that were connected to, and respecting all of them very much. We just at a certain point made our life difficult by trying to bring, you know, all these aspects to the projects. You know, it's very basically the process. I guess that Freddie is a very particular one, and is having a very particular also role as an architect and as a constructor, and very specific relationship with the Bolivian culture. But ours is slightly different, I would say, or radically different. And yeah, the only way we understood that this was possible is by studying a lot. So in many different moments, our office is looking more like a library or a study room, you know, and there is a certain moment, a frantic kind of crazy activity, designing things, making models, making drawings, but we study and we take our time to really, throughout architectural tools, study the world around, basically. Many things.
Maybe I can add my own question to that, as you kind of hinted on that. Kind of the subject of Mamani's work and so was studied, and the kind of the social groups and so on was studied at the AA, where usually in that setting you have the opportunity to work with students for an entire year in a unit. So the question is, how do you work between practice and teaching, and especially that type of teaching which is studio-based, long-term relation with individual students, so that you can now answer a question like that yes, it's part of a study that has been conducted with students many years ago. So how does that filter into your work, and how do you also, let's say, trigger certain interests or expand your library through studio work in education?
Well, obviously, and that's a personal also thing based on our trajectory, what's happening in our context here in Spain. That at a certain point we needed to be basically half dedicated to both the office and teaching, because it was no way of surviving here as an architect, as a practicing architect. Only few big offices resisted that. We were doing very well until the moment that many commissions and buildings and competitions that we won stopped. So it was really a pleasure and a period of time that was really challenging to investigate certain things that we didn't have time to investigate in our practice, because it was too ghosty. So there was like not that much money involved, and we couldn't, somehow make this long processes happening in the office to really work with the students in the way that we might think that would be possible to work in the office. So there was like this kind of really parallel lives happening, many times. We were at a certain point when we were having the possibility of having a bigger office with many people. We were also investing part of the money coming from the projects on projects done by ourselves in parallel to the academic ones, to try to understand what could be the relations and what could be the translation of these processes in the office. Something that I have to say that we try to save, and this maybe is a very personal thing, is we try to save a space for our own practice, so it's not invaded by the energy and commitment, and the ideas of the students. So that is just it's becoming just a desert, right? Of that, because everything has been explored already, to that respect. So it's kind of a weird parallelism, so that we are trying to keep ours like linked but separated a little bit as well. So not having the very same processes and methodologies, although we invest in both sides a lot of time in thinking how to make things and how to proceed with things. So to put it very simple, students of us at Harvard asked once, but do you do these kind of methodologies on the offices? And we responded, never.
Yeah.
So they're kind of similar.
Not totally true.
It's not totally true. Parallelism, but never do the same things that we do. So I think also the students need to develop and to evolve independently as responsible and people that is capable to proceed with things.
But
Yep.
also, totally different approach. But also, when we were thinking about this lecture, at a certain point, we thought there's a lot of work done by us that is in the academia. Should we talk about it? But normally we prefer to talk about our office and our practice and our own work. So of course there are links and overlaps, but still, and for us also to have the office is vital. We were in the academia, and as you explained, we have been in many places, but the office is an important part. So it should be at least 50-50, academia, office, practice.
Just one note that I received via email from our dean, Hilde Leon. She sends regards, and she very much enjoyed your lecture. So she's not on Google, so she didn't comment on the live chat, but she sends regards via email. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Luco, do you? Otherwise, I would because I have like a burning question.
Go ahead, fire.
Because there's actually this. I'm really curious what you, or like if that is part of like your sort of like considerations that's like on the horizon as your office evolves. You said it briefly in the introduction that we met last actually at the final review of Greg Lynn at the Angewandte. And that was very much it's like typological developments around so like a robotic future, right? So how does the market evolve around with the advent of delivery drones? Mm-hmm. And when I always had this question, because when you talk about plants and animals and like designing for these kinds of ecologies, what role do you foresee, or like what role do you anticipate to design for this like hybrid ecology of like things, plants and animals? Is this something you consider, or is this
so when we started, let me explain one thing. When we started the Architectural Association, teaching in there, we had a plan basically. There was like doing either 1 year or 3 years. Yeah, so that was the plan. So 1 year we said, so maybe we can dedicate the most challenging year to exploring the possibilities of thinking about social groups and cultures and identitarian markers, and how to describe them without any kind of, as we were explaining, direct and banal, simply translation into architecture. The plan was basically social groups, other species, and technologically advanced integration as well of machinery, of machines, is what we called at that time machines. So as many other plans in our life, it was evolving into different things, but it was actually the last part of the academic work, I have to say, at the AA, that we were like really investing time on having a view on technology, there was a critical one. And also understand that technology could have also a relationship with culture, and there is an intermingled relationship of high advanced technological improvements and the way we are like invaded by the digital world in our everyday lives with culture, how to deal with that in architecture. Unfortunately, and I have to say this because it was something that it didn't play a role in the office because of the actual context. So we didn't have the chance of integrating because of also multiple reasons. But it's something that during, I would say, 3-4 years was like the main center of our investigation. And looking at precisely what you explained, that was how certain typologies could drastically evolve and turn into something unknown by reconsidering the role of technology in constructed environments. And it was, I think, well, there were many really successful approaches to it, and we were really happy about that.
Cool. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
And this year, we are absolutely happy with the results after our first year at the Angevante. And this year we have introduced something new that is demanding, I would say. Our students know how demanding it is. That is, following the same methodologies that we follow during these almost 10 years at the AA, understanding all these expanded context and these notions and the relationship with technology, this year we have been trying hard to connect this with the real reality.
In very impoverished environments, precisely, and not going
and
to...
it was hard and difficult.
And it was very interesting to see how both methodologies and results could be challenged by really kind of, I would say, problematic situations that you don't know how to, I would say, approach through architecture. So the challenge for the students during this year has been like really, really, I would say, tremendous and really difficult. There was approaching European slums, so informal settlements in Europe, through purely architectural means, not somehow following the kind of advices and methodologies and ways of working, the many practices that have been looking at informal settlements around the world in underdeveloped and in the global south, basically, were having, but really developing something that could be a response to these situations in pure architectural means. It was so challenging in a way that it was like putting upside down our own preconceptions and the students' preconceptions. So something, responding and coming back to Mirko's question, is something that we try constantly, is putting ourselves and the students in the academia in situations that we are reconsidering, the tools, methodologies, our own approach to architecture. So obviously there is, at the end of the day, a lot of things coming from yourself, but putting yourself in this kind of situation and making you rethink tools, methodologies, construction techniques, and so on and so forth, to be approaching that reality, I think it's a challenging but really rewarding kind of way of approaching our profession in a way.
And technology is part of all the projects because it's all around. Maybe sometimes it's not so evident, but it's...
Let me just briefly, an example of this is the lattice of Kinetorius Foundation. So it was this moment where certain industries and certain small companies were capable in Spain to do both things, really handcrafted things for nothing almost, using digital means of definition and doing a weird mixture between something that is almost referring to the very beginning of the 20th century, with certain construction means and certain technologies, and really advanced technology. So it was only possible because we defined everything in a particular way for them to be constructing this super quick and super cheap. And that was the kind of,
technological connection.
To the place that where they constructed this, you couldn't even believe it. It's like a really a shared nowhere with and 4 or 5 people only. So it's really if you're taking this into consideration, the results are completely different. Looking also at this kind of weird combination that countries like ours are having, there is this kind of strange in-between situation in making use of really advanced technologies and really traditional crafts and knowledge about this is a must in this country. So you can only do these kind of things if you're like taking into account this. For the cherry dome was the same. We found a company was capable to digitally define everything, with this conventional steel kind of construction definition programs and people to calculate it. So it was like a kind of, but really based on the I would say on the landscape of industry and technology and that is present in this particular country.
Yeah, I remember when I was a student, we won a competition, and after winning the competition, we have a question and answers, and it was we were a group of students, and then it was an impossible building to support, absolutely impossible. And we received, it was totally impossible. And we received questions like, how do you think that the structure could work? And one of our part of the team, I didn't agree at that moment. He said, well, there is a future material that is going to come and it will be part of the structure. It's like, okay. And then we think the opposite is like the other way around. Like when you try to materialize your ideas, when you try to construct, when you try to really do things, that is something that is very important for us. There are so many constraints that you need to make decisions. And at a certain point, technology can help you, but at a certain point, it's not only the way of translating things.
I think a construction technology itself and hybrid always. So it's always happening in this kind of a compound mode. It's always a relationship with materials, relationship of crafts, techniques, machinery, knowledge, a culture that is being transmitted. So it's always kind of a weird assemblage of things that make things possible, make things be capable to materialize. And I think that's the way we think about in terms of construction technology. Whenever we think about the buildings, we always thought about them as material assemblages, hybrid weird mixture of really advanced and not advanced things. The things that you're with the range of your hand, basically. If you're a maker, you have to make things with the things that you have.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, I know we are getting to an end. It's, I don't know, Mirko, is there any question you want to pose from the chat, or do we?
I think we cleared most of the question. Yes. Yeah.
Cool. So I don't know. I can't thank you. It has been the utmost pleasure to have you and have the conversation with you. And we are super grateful that you accepted the invitation from Leibniz University to give an insight into your work. It has been a pure pleasure. Thank you. Thank you so much. And please, reach out anytime you are here in either in Hanover or in Berlin. We would love to continue the conversation.
That would be fantastic. And this time physically instead of throughout.
Yes, exactly. Cool. Thank you so much. I'm doing the applause again. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Good.
Bye.